Our message today is out of Genesis chapter 22, starting in verse 1. It's about walking by faith. That's Genesis chapter 22, starting in verse 1. It says, "Then it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham." Now this is interesting. It says in James that God never tempts us with evil, and it's so. The temptation here is to decide between serving God and not serving God. It says, "God did tempt Abraham, and said unto Abraham, and he said, Behold, here I am." So the question is, was Abraham ready? And the answer is yes, he was ready. He was ready for two reasons. First of all, he was ready because God's always on time. Now, we may think he may be late, or he may be early, or we may not want him to show up at all, but the fact is he's always on time. Secondly, this could happen because Abraham had a relationship with God and he could hear God. So he was ready, by definition. God is the God of the eternal now, the Bible tells us. And so he always works in the present. Not in the past, not in the future, but always today, now. And so God speaks to him and he calls his name and he says, "I'm here. I'm ready to hear you. I'm ready to do what you call me to do." This is important because most people aren't. And I'm not talking about non-believers, I'm talking about believers. Most people aren't. When God calls their name, they're usually too busy. "I'm busy right now. I'm busy taking care of the stuff I want to take care of." You really don't want to hear. But Abraham, in the midst of whatever he's doing, he says, "Yeah, I can hear you. I'm with your program. Let's go." This is important because do we make time when God speaks into our hearts and say, yeah, I'll get to that later? Or are we hearing him now? Are we ready? Abraham is ready. It's in verse 2, and he said, God said to him, "Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of." Wow. Now, most people could think of a lot of reasons to delay that. Yeah, but I got my crops taken. I got my flocks together. My wife is sick right now. It's like I got stuff to do. And we can always come up with stuff to do when God calls us to do something. But God's calling him now. He says, "Go, and on your way I'll tell you which mountain to offer your son for a burnt offering." I didn't say anything about killing him, but that's a different issue. We'll get on to that later. Verse 3. "And Abraham rose up early in the morning." So he's with the program. He doesn't delay. And this is important because we like to delay, especially when it's a trial of faith. See, God often calls us to do what we don't understand. And some people say, well, it mustn't be God because I don't understand it. Well, if I served a God that I understood, he wouldn't be God. I'd be a God just like he was. So I want to serve a God that I don't understand. It sounds weird. It's like, why? Because he's smarter than me. If I could understand him, then it wouldn't be much of a God to me. If he is God, then I'm not going to understand what he does. But as long as I know that he's a good God and that he loves me and he wants the best for me, I can believe even though it looks hard, even though it looks difficult, even though it doesn't look right. Why? Because I know the voice of God. Abraham knew the voice of God. A lot of people say, "Oh, that mustn't be God talking. That must be the Satan for sure, because you don't go around killing your own children." He didn't understand, but he knew the voice of God. And you really do know the voice of God, because usually when he speaks to us, it's like we want to get somebody else's opinion so that we can not listen. That's how you know. It's like, well, I really don't want to do this, so how do I get around it? Let's talk it up and see if I can talk myself out of it. Abraham rose up early in the morning and saddled his ass and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering, rose up and went unto the place of which God had told him. He's ready. He's ready. He's not going to get there and say, "Oh, I forgot to get the wood," and then come back and say, "Oh, I forgot to get the fire." He's going with the fire, with the wood, everything that God calls him to. The knife, everything. He's got everything. Then on the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. How did he know that was the place? Because the Holy Spirit spoke to him. It's like this, that's the place. You saw it, it's like, yeah, that's it, all right. You ever know in those times of trials, it's like we want to drag our feet. It's like, I just don't want to really get with the program. I don't want to really face this trial. I don't want to really walk through this trial. But it's not God trying us, it's we trying us. That is, he knows what to expect, but he wants to draw that out of us, to prove to us who we really are. He lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. He was in the Holy Spirit. He heard the same God that told him to take his son and go to the land of Moriah. It's the same God that spoke to him and said, yeah, that's the right place to go. Verse 5, and Abraham said unto his young men, abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship, and come again to you. You guys just stand here. My son and I are going. Why did he do that? It was personal. This is between him and God and his son. Didn't need his boys for that. Verse 6, and Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son, and he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and then went both of them together. Okay, so they're waiting now, they're going up. This is like the moment of truth. And Isaac spake unto Abraham his father, and said, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. And he said, behold, the fire and the wood. But where's the lamb for burnt offering? I mean, Isaac's seen this before. This is not new to Isaac. He's a young man. He knows how this works. He knows how these offerings work. They get the lamb, they slit the throat of the lamb, they bleed it out, they skin the lamb, they build a fire, they put the lamb on it, they burn the lamb. He's seen this many times before. Verse 8, and Abraham said, my son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went both of them together. This was something he spoke in faith. God will provide himself a lamb. But it was also prophetic and didn't realize it. It was prophetic in the context of what God was going to do that day, but it was also prophetic thousands of years later when God offered up his son, Jesus, on the cross. And they came to the place which God had told him of. And Abraham built an altar there and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son and laid him upon the altar upon the wood. Now, Abraham is over 100 years old. We know that because he was 100 when Isaac was born. Now, Isaac is weaned. He's probably early teens, maybe his 20s. Could be even older than that, because the next thing in the next chapter it talks about Sarah being 127 years old when she dies. And that means that Isaac was 37 years old. So it's like, I don't know how much time, but somewhere between like 17 and 27. So he's a young man, he's strong, and his father's over 100 years old. It's like, are you really going to tie up this young man and offer him as an offering? If Isaac resisted, there wasn't much he could do. So Abraham is looking at this, and you know what? That was never an issue for Abraham. Now, in the natural, you look and say, how am I going to work this? How am I going to convince my young, strong son that I'm going to offer him for nothing? Never entered into Abraham's mind. Why is that? Because if God called him to do it, God was going to make a way.
Amen.
Now, that is very, very, very important, because we look at challenges that God brings us every day, and it looks impossible. You know it. You've had those situations. That person's not going to change. That situation's not going to change. That's not going to go away. We've experienced all of those things. The facts are in your face saying it's not going to happen. But God is the truth, and the truth changes the facts. The facts change every day, but the truth, Jesus Christ, never changes. And God says, this is what you're going to do. You are going to offer your son. So it never entered into Abraham's mind to think, how am I going to do it? Because he wasn't going to do it. And that's the way that we have to look at those challenges. Well, that's interesting. I know that I can't fix that problem. But I serve a God that put me into this situation, and I can trust him to solve the problem. Why? Because I can't solve it, but I serve a God that can solve it. I serve a God that can unscramble scrambled eggs. So he looked at this and he said, well, this is going to work out. And guess what? He built an altar, laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. How did that happen? We don't know. And it wasn't because he was a sweet talker. And it wasn't because he hit him over the head. And it wasn't because he drugged him. God did something supernatural there. Isaac got with the program. And Abraham, okay, so that's a big deal in and of itself. How are you going to get that young man on the altar when you're over 100 years old? You're not going to do it by force. And God doesn't work that way anyway. Got with the program. Then, this is the moment of truth. Not how you can get how you can get Isaac on the altar. God was responsible for that. But now Abraham is responsible for the next part. Doing what God told him to do and not understanding what it was all about. See, that's always the trial of faith. Do you understand what God's telling you to do? If you don't, well, that's not a problem. That's what faith is about. Not understanding God, but still being obedient to him. That's real faith. So now he's looking at it, and he's well over 100 years old. He's looking at the end of his life. His first son, Ishmael, he had to send him on his way, as God said. Now this is son here, he's going to offer him up. And he's thinking, what is my legacy? What happens to the prophecy of God that I was going to be the father of many nations? Seeing this is my only son, I got to offer him up. He doesn't get bogged down in that. He doesn't get bogged down in that because he doesn't know the answers to those questions. But he knows God has the answer to those questions. And God has never lied and has never proved to be a liar. And God said he was going to be the father of many nations. So it's like, I guess I have to trust God. Can you trust God in your circumstance? Even though it looks what it is. And maybe it's been that way for a long time. And maybe you have no hope in the natural of it changing. But do you have hope in Jesus? You don't have to hope in your situation. We can't hope in our situation. The only thing we can hope in is Jesus Christ. Because he's a loving and a merciful God. Verse 10, and Abraham stretched forth his hand, took the knife to slay his son. Picks it up. It's like, okay, time to do what God called me to do. Not understanding it, just getting with the program. Verse 11, and the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here am I. He said, lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. Amazing. Can you imagine the release he felt at that point? The son that all his hopes for the future were on. Isaac was his extension. That was a manifestation of his hope, his love, his expectation for the future. And God said, no. People don't understand what it says. For now I know that thou fearest God. God knew that before that. God knew how that was going to turn out. Why did he say that? The issue was the manifestation to Abraham and to the world. God knew what was in Abraham. That's why God called Abraham to do that. And in fact, when you read in the New Testament, the fact is God gave Abraham a picture of the death of Jesus Christ on the cross. Because of this. Because that's exactly what happened. In the same way that Abraham offered his son Isaac, the Father offered Jesus Christ, the perfect lamb, the offering for the sin of mankind. Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything to him. And now you fear God, seeing thou hast not withholden thy son, the only son, from me. This is a manifestation to the world. God knew. But Abraham may not have known until that time. You can talk about, well, what I would do in this situation, but you don't know until you get there. Mm-hmm. We all like to think we know what we would do in certain circumstances, but we don't know till we're there. And you know what? we really don't want to know. Because nobody really wants to be in that situation to have to make the hard choices. But he made the hard choice. He says, you manifested this to the world, you manifested it to me. You manifested it to yourself. You proved to yourself that you have the faith in me. Faith, the highest form of faith. The faith that doesn't understand what God is doing. And still getting with the program anyway. Verse 13, and Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. He came there to make an offering. He understood. The ram was there to take the place. He took care of business. And Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah Jireh, God my provider. As it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord shall it be seen. God always provides a way. We don't understand. Sometimes we'll get ourselves into trouble, but just like this, God will substitute something else or someone else in our stead. Not because we earned it, not because we deserve it, but simply because we're the children of the living God. He has mercy on us because we've accepted him. Our name, his name is on us. And he protects his name. Like I said, not because we earned it, not because we deserve it, but because he's a good God. We call him God. When we treat him like God, he is God to us. And that's the point. What's the point? The point is we have to be prepared. How are we prepared? We can't prepare like athletes in terms of doing exercises and things. But we can prepare by reading the Word, by praying, by being in fellowship, by doing the things that God calls us to do. And that preparation just means one thing. When he speaks to us, we'll hear him. That's being prepared. And when we hear him, real faith is doing what he says, not asking him first for an understanding of what he's doing. Not asking him to pass you by, but asking him to guide and direct you, to give you the strength to do what he calls you to do. Even though you may not understand, just getting with the program. That's the walk of faith. We see the result. Everything he thought he understood, he didn't understand at all. He got a much deeper understanding of God. He had a much better appreciation of what God had given him and done for him. And that's the walk of faith. And that's my message for today.